Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie. Welcome to the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway, where you'll learn the keys to building a profitable speaking business from speaking industry pros. Each week, we interview a great guest who will share his or her speaking journey, identify what their keys to success have been, and highlight some critical mistakes they've made along the way that you'll want to avoid. Be sure to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, sit back, tune in, and get ready to meet this week's guest.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Spotlight on Speaking show. I am Brett Ridgway, and I'm excited to have as my guest today, Ely Delaney. Now, Eli and I go back, probably close to 20 years, and we've crossed paths many times at events, but Ely is your automated systems strategist and is also known as the People Whisperer. He's the creator of the Follow Up Rockstar System, teaching entrepreneurs how to go from surviving to thriving in any economy through the art and science of building strong relationships and following up for life. He's an Amazon bestseller with his 2 books, Marketing Tidbits and Networking Tidbits. With a passion for connecting people, his best-selling training course, Networking Like a Rockstar, has almost 1,400 students registered around the world. Ely helps speakers, authors, and coaches automate their follow-up to grow their business without having to have an MBA from MIT. He's the guy to help you build a 24/7 automated system and turn you into a follow-up rock star. Welcome, Ely, to the Spotlight on Speaking show.
It is always a pleasure to get to hang out with you, my friend. And yes, it has been a long time. We would have met either 2007, late 2007 or early 2008. That's when we met.
Now, would you remember what event it may have been at?
If you were at I know which event possibly it could have been. It possibly could have been a Freedom Factor from Armin Marin if you were at the one in Vegas.
In Vegas, yeah.
And that was December 2007. If it wasn't that, then I know for sure that we met at the big seminar in Atlanta in 2008. That was guaranteed. Right. That was the worst case as late as we met.
All right, so I apologize. I overstated. It's only been 15 years rather than 20. But
hey, well, it's been a long time. We're all getting old, man.
Oh man, and all those events blend together after a while. You can't remember who you met where and when.
Yeah,
but,
No, I just know where our path came from, and it was a very cool path that got me into a very, very deep rabbit hole of this whole internet marketing space and the speaking space, and I still blame Armin for most of it.
Well, somebody's got to bear the blame. Armin's a good person to do that. So
that's true.
All right, so let's talk about your speaking journey, Ely. So I like to say there are 3 types of speakers. You have your keynote presenter, obviously, who's paid a fee to go into a corporation or an association and deliver a talk. You have what I call your platform seller, who obviously does content delivery and then pitches something from the front of the room to sell on the back of the room. And then I have your third type, which I consider your regular business guy, your chiropractor or whatever, who may do a little bit of speaking to promote their primary business, but they're not really selling from the stage per se. Right. So which of those categories might you fall under your journey as a speaker?
What's funny is to some degree, all 3 of them, honestly. I have done paid speaking gigs. Those are fun. But I also do a lot of, platform speaking, speak to sell. But I also don't tend to, depending on the audience and where I'm at, I tend to not necessarily sell from stage. I sell them into a conversation that we can then really get to know each other, because I like to really know who my clients are. I'm just not selling a course. It's a program where I'm like, okay, I want to make sure you're a good fit for me and I'm a good fit for you before we ever, I don't want to look at your credit card until then. And so it kind of leans a little bit that direction. And then I do a ton of speaking for different groups, sharing what I do in order to, bring in clients that way. So it's a little bit of all 3, but it's kind of more of a hybrid of number 2 and number 3 than the first one. I do some paid speaking, but not a huge amount.
So is there a preferred model out of all those? I'm guessing it's your hybrid number 2, 3, but
That is it, because I love going in and being able to, as a speaker, I love the speaking part of it, and the pressure to make a sale actually, to me, kind of ruins the conversation. So for me, I personally love it where we can just have a cool conversation. I'm like, if this resonates with you, let's have a talk. Let's get together. Here's my calendar. Go book on my calendar. Let's, one of my things that, above my head here, if you're watching the video, says meet cool people. I love to go speak at places. I travel across the country to do this. And then I'm like, picking 10 or 15 people. I'm like, hey, let's go have dinner tonight. And the dinners are what really gets me excited, because my favorite thing in the world is to get to know somebody by breaking bread and getting to know them, and just having a real fun conversation. And so the speaking, for me, honestly, I love doing it. It's a lot of fun. I love sharing that stuff, but being able to use that as a starting point to get people to want to have just a conversation with me is my favorite part of the speaking business.
so how many years do you have to go back to do you remember that first speaking engagement?
Oh yeah. I can completely remember that first speaking engagement, and it was terrifying. So the funny thing, I'll go back even further. I don't know if you even actually know this. In my previous life, I was a roadie. I was in the rock and roll business. And the reason that I got into doing that was because I was actually grew up in the music industry, and I was actually trained, like classically trained in voice, and I could play a couple of instruments, all that kind of stuff. The problem was I had stage fright.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went from being a performer to running studios and running lighting gigs and all the fun stuff behind the scenes, because I was terrified to get on stage and sing. And that's how I got, from that world. And then I get into entrepreneurship, started my first company was web and graphic design agency. And the first speaking gig I had was I had joined a chamber of commerce and went to one of their local, their weekly leads groups.
Yeah.
And it was called the Lunch Bunch, because I was not a morning person. I was not going to get up and talk to people at 7 a.m. And I show up, and, it was great. It's a small group. It's like 12 people, 10, 12 people.
Mm-hmm.
And the leader of the group is this chamber rep, says, hey, you know what? We actually, we don't have any other web designers in here, so you should do a 10-minute presentation in 2 weeks. We got a spot for you. I'd like to get you in here as soon as possible, so then that way everybody can get to know you. And I'm like, okay. I literally took those 2 weeks. I put together an 8-page handout. And it was funny because part of the reason why this is so fresh is because I literally told this story to somebody yesterday that was talking about their speaking career and how they're trying to get started. And so I'm trying to make them feel better about it. 2 weeks practicing this thing. And I have this hand out a copy to everybody. And I get up there and I have the paper and I'm just shaking. I'm reading it word for word, shaking, terrified. There's literally like 10, 11 other people in the room. And I'm terrified to do this. This was also the point where I had a very, very, very big learning curve on my entire speaking personality, how I do it down the road. One of the guys in the audience in that 2 weeks, guy by the name of Gary Fullington, he was a mortgage guy in the group. And the first week we were there, he came up to me after. There was like, you do websites. I need a website. Let's talk. And so we ended up having lunch, and he got to know me a little bit in that 2-week time frame. And so he sat there. He was like in the first row, and as I'm talking, he could tell I'm terrified. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody could tell I was terrified, because it wasn't like I was hiding it. But he started reading ahead on my handout and stopped me and asked me questions, just like, the next paragraph. And so what was happening was then he would break me out of reading my cheat sheet here, and I would just answer the question. But I knew the knowledge. Mm-hmm. And so it was just a conversation. He's asking a question, I'm answering the question. And then he'd ask another question, I'd ask another one. And it was just, and he broke me from that terror that I had. and getting out of having to read my script. And I didn't even realize until years later how powerful that one moment right there was, because
Yeah.
it taught me my speaking style is very interactive. Like, I don't care if it's 10 people in that room or 300 people that I've talked to over Armin stages before. It doesn't matter. You pick one person, you're having a conversation with one person at a time, and you just make it a conversation, not a speech. And it was like night and day difference for me. And that was probably one of those powerful lessons that I learned. And luckily I had somebody who helped me learn that early on.
Well, that's, a person that you think about as your business career moves along, that you will be forever indebted to without, having
100%.
worded. But there's definitely people that made a mark on your life that it's important to recognize the turning points that they provided you. So I did not know that about your background, Eli. I have a daughter who's a professional stagehand as her vocation. So she does lights and sounds for the Indianapolis Symphony and all sorts of events over in Indianapolis. So
yeah, that's
what
I
her
used
world.
to do.
She loves it. She loves all that theater stuff and all that. So
it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's great because depending on what you're doing and what your personality is like, it's great because you're doing the same thing day in and day out, but you're working with different artists all the time. And that's pretty fun.
So how have you adapted to the virtual world of speaking from the live stage in-person events?
Yeah. So I mean, this part, I'm already a geek. So I've got all the tools and the tech and all that kind of stuff. So making the shift to go virtual technology wise was a piece of cake for me. That part was easy. Obviously I had to do some investments because I wasn't prepared to go full on, studio and the cool green screen and all that kind of stuff. But when everything happened in 2020 and we made that shift, I was like, okay, this is not going to go away anytime soon. We have to adjust. We have to change this. We have to pivot. And that was, every time there's a economic shift of some sort, I like to have, there's a word that goes with it. The previous one was evolve. This one was called pivot, because you had to move on a dime. You got to move fast. And in that time frame, I had, like, the first week after it really came down hard and everything in the country was shutting down, I booked 16 different podcasts / virtual summits in 1 week, because I saw people they're like, okay, I got, my live event got canceled. I gotta do something. So let's try this virtual thing. And I'm like, all right, you need somebody, let's do this. And so the technology wise has been very easy for me. I will have to say the one part that is very hard is I don't connect as well. I love the face to face. I love being able to look somebody in the eye. And when we're working in the virtual stage, so many times people turn off their cameras or, they're off doing other things when you're speaking. Where if I'm in a room with somebody, I can literally point at them and start talking to them. And so there's definitely some shifting on that of how do you be more truly interactive without the same boring put so and so in the chat every 2 minutes, because you hear people do that and it just gets annoying after a while. So that's kind of my take on it.
So let's look at your keys to success, Eli, and I want to do that both from the virtual world and the in-person live stage event. So let's start with live stages, and what would you attribute your biggest 2 or 3 keys to success in a live event being?
Most important, I participate. So I'm not just there to show up, get on stage, do a song and dance and leave. And to be perfectly honest, I know a lot of hosts. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. You and I both been in the same industry for a really long time. We know a lot of people, and hosts, honestly, they hate that. They hate the people that come in, they literally come in, do their presentation and then skedaddle out. I'm there most of the time. If I'm not there, it's because I might have an emergency call or something, or maybe I'm actually in a hall, not actually like truly networking with somebody or connecting with them. But beyond that, I'm there, I'm participating. I'm sitting at the tables, sharing notes with the people on the table to get to know them better. Because if you want to connect with your audience better, be with them. And so in person, I think that that's honestly critical. I've walked into rooms and just done amazingly well. And it wasn't, the presentation was the validator that I know my stuff, but the connections with the other people are what made a difference. And the hosts appreciate that and are more likely to invite you back.
Oh, so important. And yeah, if I had to list my biggest pet peeve in the speaking industry, the hit and run speaker would be, if not at the top of the list,
Yep.
but right there. So, all right, how about a hint number 2 for our listeners?
Hit number 2, make it a conversation. I kind of touched on this earlier. Make it about a conversation. That presenting, just speaking, going through slides, and this goes whether this is in person or virtual. Make it conversational. Tell stories that are realistic and funny. You want to do storytelling as part of your presentation. We're all taught that, but the problem is people have either this huge story that after 2 minutes into it we're bored as hell, or they forget it altogether. It's like interject it into it, tell little nuggets, and most importantly, give people something that's actionable. Because I've had even a very, very, very well-known, I guarantee anybody listening to this has heard this name, speaker that I was super excited to hear them speak. I heard them speak, and 90 minutes later, it was literally 90 minutes of rambling, and I got nothing of value out of it. And I'm like, okay, you didn't not just entice me to not buy your program, but you didn't give me anything to feel like you're an expert, even though by name I know you're an expert, but you lost credibility instead of adding it. So give people actionable steps. That's like, I can attribute this directly back to something I learned from Armin. The very first time I saw Armin speak was in 2007. It was October 2007 at Joe Polish's Super Conference in Mesa, Arizona. Mm-hmm. And I saw him speak, and that was the day when I knew I wanted to get into speaking, because I saw him on stage and he told his story. It was a very impressive story. He made jokes, Armin, he's very sarcastic and very snarky. And he gave us literally actionable steps. It's like, okay, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. Now, when you get done, when you're done for the day, go back to your hotel room and go do that, and then come back tomorrow. And that was an aha moment for me. And that's how I've always integrated into my presentations. And I can tell you, so many people have come back to me and said, thank you so much. This was, out of this entire event, you're the only one that I felt like I actually got something out of. And that's a huge, that makes my heart go. So that's what we're looking for.
I mean, you've heard Eli and me mention the name Armin here a couple of times. And just for those of you who don't know him, he's Armin Morin, and he runs Marketing University. So if you want to know more about Armin, just go to marketinguniversity.com.
Yeah, you didn't bring me on here to plug Armin, but I mean, he taught me a lot of good stuff, and I know, you and I both know it pretty well.
I mean, he's had an influence on both of our lives in a great way.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Anyway, so let's talk about the virtual stage a little bit now. I mean, obviously you talked about storytelling still applies to the virtual arena, but
Yes.
Are there any other distinct tips for success to profit in a virtual world as a speaker?
What I have actually found, that if you can get away from slides and have the conversation with people, just like you do on stage. And I found this my best presentations using virtual, where I might have just a basic outline ready, so I make sure that I stay on track, because I can easily go squirrel on stuff. But I'm looking at the audience. So I'm doing my speaking, I'm doing my presentation, I'm sharing tips, tricks, resources, case studies, all the stuff. But then I'm reaching out. And when I ask the question, I'm not just asking the question to get them to interact, but I'm getting them to interact so I can interact back with them. So I'm like, hey, oh yeah, Julie just, so-and-so question, Julie just answered this. That is awesome. So, let's do this. I will also have like my Facebook Messenger over on my second monitor. And I'm like, I want you to connect with me. And when you connect with me, what I want you to do is I want you to send me a message, and I want you to say, hey, I saw you on XYZ show. And this was the thing I liked the most. And then as people are doing that during the presentation, I can see it over here and I'm calling them out. I'm like, oh, good. Julie just sent me a message on Facebook. So yes, as soon as we get done here, I'm going to go ahead and accept that. And we're going to have a cool chat. That way you're creating more interactivity, even though you're not in person.
Yeah.
That's huge. That is so huge. I can even say I did a presentation just last week. I went back to using a slide deck, and I don't think that it was the right choice. It still turned out fine, but it wasn't what I should have done.
I find it a challenge, honestly, to watch the chat while I'm trying to do a presentation, and I just can't follow the chat whatsoever. So that's not a skill that I have particularly mastered in terms of interactivity, because it's like I get into a flow, and it's kind of a brain dump sometimes, and it's like, I don't even recognize that that's over there.
Well, when I do that, the reason I do it that way is because I'll have a Google Doc that's just a sliver of my screen that I can see my bullet points. I'm like, okay, I gotta go here, I gotta go here. It's just that way I cover everything and I don't forget. And like I said, don't go squirrel, stage left somewhere. But going back to the theater reference there. But then I'm watching the chat as I'm talking, and I'm like, all right, so is this making sense? You guys got any questions? Let's make sure we're okay with everything. And then I take a drink of my coffee, and I'm watching that. And so then I'll just go back to that one little sheet, and I'm like, okay, next point. And I just keep it very conversational, no different than if I think of like a fireside chat. And I found that this is something that I actually do. I do fireside chats every once in a while, and they're a ton of fun. And all you're doing is you're bringing a bunch of people together and having a conversation and just chatting about a topic, whatever that topic is.
Yeah.
And so I think of a presentation in the virtual world very, very similar when I can get away with it if it works.
Well, that's great advice, Eli. And I have a couple other questions I wish to ask you, but before we do, let's take a quick break for a word from our sponsor.
Are you a business owner or entrepreneur who's had great success in the business world, and now you want to launch a speaking career to share your message with the world? If that's you, then listen up. 25-year speaking industry veteran Brett Ridgway has released his latest special report, 3 key things entrepreneurs must master to build a profitable speaking business. To pick up your copy, go to brettridgway.com/freebie.
And we are back with the Spotlight on Speaking show, and my guest this week is Ely Delaney. And Eli, one of my favorite questions to ask my guests is, okay, buddy, don't get embarrassed here a little bit. Don't be afraid to bare your soul. And tell me maybe a couple of mistakes that you made along the way that were embarrassing at the time, but you learned a great lesson from them, and it's something you would advise other people not to do.
Yeah, there's a couple of different things. Number one, there's a trend going out where speakers are going through training to become speakers, get better on that, which I do agree with. But then they're investing a lot of money to speak on stages when they don't have the experience yet. And I mean, they're dumping, some of them are dumping 5 or 10K to get on a stage. And it's a great stage. There's nothing wrong with the stage. But if you don't have that experience yet, you're not ready to be doing that, because you're going to get up there, you're inexperienced, and you're going to fumble. That's just a fact. You're going to do that. You don't want to do that in front of a big audience where you just invested $5,000. You want to do that at a small group that's 10, 15, maybe 30 people. Do it on a virtual event because it's great and easy, and you didn't spend a lot of money on flights and hotels as well. Start with some smaller stuff. Get your feet wet. Get comfortable with your presentation first. Then go back and do that, because I have been in this industry long enough. I've seen people literally 90K in debt filing for bankruptcy because they invested in all this stuff and they just didn't have enough experience to get the results they were looking for. It's not that their topic was bad. It wasn't that their program was bad. It wasn't that they weren't a great person. They just weren't experienced enough to warrant those kind of investments yet.
So a lot of people say that you should never speak for free. Others say that you should speak for free. So where do you come down on that particular issue?
It depends on the audience. And for me, like, I speak for free because I know I'm going to make sales. So I will, matter of fact, I've even been paid to speak at certain places. And there's times where you can do that. Like I said, you gotta be in the right place to do that. But speaking for free, I don't think is an issue. I love doing it. First and foremost, worst case scenario, you're practicing. You're practicing in front of a real audience. Practicing in front of the mirror is one thing. Practicing in front of your dog is another thing. It still ain't the same as getting in front of a real audience. So especially if you're new, you take every speaking gig you can till you get at least 100 under your belt, because then you're going to get better at your deliverability, what your content looks like, what resonates, what doesn't resonate. You're going to get a better feel for who the audience is. For me, I have my basic presentations that are the basics of what I'm going to cover every time. But a lot of times I'll come in and I'm like, you know what, this audience needs something a little bit different. And I will, on the fly, I'll change it because I know it's going to fit better for that audience. The only way you're going to know that is if, number one, you do what I said earlier and hang out with the audience, get to know them. And two, by practicing to make it so you can do that. The fun thing about this is I get told this all the time. People will be like, we just wung it and you did such an amazing job. And I'm like, that's because I've done this a lot. It's not because I'm amazing. It's because I got a lot of experience doing it. And it's like, even, we just get on a call, we just talk, whether we get on a webinar and we just talk, we're just having a conversation. I know my content. I've been doing this for almost 30 years. So, it's not about that. It's about how do you find a good conversation with people and know it's okay, especially when you're starting out. And even later on, I still do a lot of free ones, but when you're first starting out, you take every gig you can to get that comfort level going. And then you can start picking out.
I agree. So maybe got one more mistake maybe that you'd suggest people don't make?
The next mistake that I do see people make is you've got to know your numbers. And when I say that, I'm going to say that with some very, very distinct instructions, because in the speaking world, especially speak to sell, people tend to use the term buying units. And I know you've heard this before. You go into a room and it's like, okay, speaker comes up. How many buying units do we have today? You just removed the human element from the entire experience, because now you've turned the human beings that have hearts, souls, ears, eyes into a credit card. Now, I'm a full-on 100%. I am not hiding the fact that I am a capitalist and I enjoy it. I like getting paid. But there's a difference between getting paid for providing a good service and looking at people as a payday. There is a very distinct difference. So the first thing, be wary of that, running into that realm. Okay. The second thing, as you get into things, you're going to need to know your numbers. And this is where this comes into play. You need to know how much, number one, what are my sales going to look like? And it might be a front end sale and a back end sale. And you got to know your numbers, and you're not going to know those right at first. You got to figure that out pretty quick, but start tracking that information, because then you have to know, is it worth it? So like I might go to an event and I might be, when I was living in Portland, Oregon for a while, and I was speaking in Miami, Florida, which is almost as far across the country as you can get. And I went there every month for almost a year. And I knew, the flight for the hotel and the flight and all the stuff with it, it was not cheap. You go to Portland, there is no cheap flights, period. So, it's like, if I look at a plane, it's $600, right? Yep. So I had to know, how many sales do I have to make this worth my time? And knowing that speak to sell, the host is probably going to get a commission off of it. You have to know that. Track that stuff, because that's the time where you may have to decide whether it's worth it or not. Because if you're out, $3,000 just to get there, then you're selling $1,000 program. If you sell 3, you just break even. And technically you're losing money because you still have to deliver on it.
Well, and you have to pay the promoter's cut. So you probably need to sell 6 just to break even. So
Exactly. And so you have to know that stuff. And that's where just know it. If you're okay with that, let's say you're selling a $2,000 program and it's going to cost you $2,000 to be there and do your thing and all that stuff, then it's like, okay, I need to sell 2 to make this worthwhile. Knowing what I know about the audience, is this going to be worth it for me?
Mhm.
And when you're talking about local stuff, I'm saying, if it's a hour drive, then you speak anywhere you can. But when you're talking about that kind of stuff, just know your numbers. And you may know at first, you might run a little bit in the red to begin with because you're learning, but you have to pay attention to that and you have to be able to recoup that pretty quick, or else you're going to end up being that $90,000 in debt with bankruptcy right knocking on your door.
So true. And it's such great advice. So right now I want to give you, Eli, a couple minutes here to tell a little bit more to people about what you do, what is it you offer, how they can get involved in your world if they so choose.
Okay, well, thank you. So I created the Follow Up Rockstar System. That is my flagship program, and it is everything that I have learned in the internet marketing space, everything that I've done. And what it is it's actually for speakers, coaches, consultants, people that use speaking as their primary marketing tool. And reality is most speakers, let's just imagine you're speaking from stage and you're maybe you're selling something, maybe you're not selling something, but you're using lead gen, so you're giving something away. Give me your name and email address, or text this number, or click this QR code, or whatever it is, to give away something from stage. What I find is that most people don't have a back end system for that, and most of those leads are not coming through. So you're speaking, maybe you speak in front of 100 people, you do a rock star job, you get 10 people that are ready to rock and roll and give you their credit card right then and there and enroll in your program. What about the other 90? What are you going to do with those people? How do you follow up with them? Build a long-term relationship that works. And so this is what I did for myself, and it worked so well. Other speakers started coming to me back, 16, 17 years ago, when I really first started getting into the speaking side of things. And they were coming to me going, okay, Eli, I see what you're doing here. Who's your guy? I'm like, well, it's actually me. And they're like, cool, here's my credit card. How much? And I started putting these things in place that were literally doubling my sales because of the follow-up that I put in place, that communication of playing the long game, because I would put it in place, I would build it, and you build it once and let it run forever. So this is the kind of stuff that I do with clients. I help them come up with the strategy, the psychology, and the language to build follow-up systems. And it's not software specific. As long as whatever platform you're using does what we need, that's great. I do have my preferences and I can help people with that. But the idea is understanding the psychology of it. How do you get people to want to be on your list? How do you get people to want to do business with you, stick around with you, and refer you? I mean, I've got people who refer me who I've known forever. They will never become clients because they just don't feel like they need me, but they're referring people to me day in and day out. And my claim to fame right now, I have my favorite story. I've got a client who September 16th, 2020, he replies to one of my emails. He says, hey, Eli, I've been on your list for a couple of years now. Thank you so much for everything you've done to help me out. My son's starting a construction company, and I'm wondering if you can help us with some marketing stuff. And of course, that starts a dialogue, which is awesome because conversations lead to sales. But I go into my software, my database, and like, okay, what does a couple of years mean? How long has he been on my list? He had actually seen me speak live at a SCORE event in Scottsdale, Arizona, July 3rd, 2010. 10 years and 3 months later, he's coming back to me, thanking me for everything I've done for him and referring his son's business. And I put him into a machine that just worked. I didn't manually do any of that.
That's cool. And, it's interesting to be able to track something back that far and recognize what it led to over time. So if people want to find out more about how you can help them, where should they go URL wise, Eli?
The easiest way is connectwithely.com. And Eli is with Y, by the way, ELY. So connectwithely.com. You can the cool thing is that's like the hub for everything else I do. You can find all my social media sites, by the way. Like I said earlier, if you send me a friend request or LinkedIn request or something, let me know you saw me on this podcast. I love hearing that. And by the way, I get a ton every day. the people who send me a message go to the top of the list. So I'm much more likely to accept you right away. But then I got some free stuff, and you can even book a call with me. I'm very open about having the book a call thing. I like to meet cool people, and that's like my mantra is meet cool people. And so whether it's we're talking about business or not, I don't care. Let's just have a cool conversation. So connect with Ely.com is the easiest way to find out anything and everything you ever want to know about me.
All right. Well, we'll make sure that's down in the show notes down below. So before we wrap her up, Ely, any final words of wisdom for the aspiring speaker?
The biggest thing, I'm going to go back to what I said, make it a conversation. Your job is to inspire people to do something different, to do something better with their lives. But you don't do that with a lecture. You do that with a conversation. You do that by just making them feel like you actually care about them. And if you can put that into your presentation, you will be golden.
All right. Well, again, such great advice throughout this episode. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. My sincere thanks to you, Ely, for being my guest this week. And as always, I wish you the greatest success in all that you do. And may 2023 be your greatest year yet. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
This has been the Spotlight on Speaking show with Brett Ridgway. Be sure to join us every week as we interview speaking industry pros and have them share their best tips for building a profitable speaking business. Until next week, thank you for tuning in, and remember to visit our website at spotlightonspeaking.com so you can enjoy even more great episodes like this one. While you're here, be sure to subscribe via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Spotlight on Speaking show. Until then, our sincere best wishes to you for the greatest of success as you work to build your own profitable speaking business.